So, greetings, friends. Today's talk is on mindfulness as the Buddha taught mindfulness. The article I'm referring to from the website is called the Dhamma of Mindfulness. That a very specific quality of mindfulness is what the Buddha taught, and the one of the purposes behind this article in my talk is to point out the significant differences between modern mindfulness, inside Buddhism, and just in general, and what the Buddha actually taught mindfulness for. So mindfulness means to hold in mind or to recollect. And so any concept, any idea, any focus on a feeling can be held in mind. So just in a general way, mindfulness is not skillful and it's not unskillful. It depends on the application of mindfulness. But in modern mindfulness, as mindfulness relates to the Buddha's Dhamma, that type of mindfulness, meaning a generalized, focusing on concepts or focusing on things that are arising but are completely impermanent, is a misapplication of mindfulness and simply leads to more distraction. The Buddha taught mindfulness in very specific ways. One of the most famous suttas is the Satipatthana Sutta, the sutta on the four foundations of mindfulness, which is often misunderstood, often misapplied, and often simply dismissed, where the Buddha was very, very specific on how to apply mindfulness as it relates to his teachings. There's an article on the website too about that, with 7 different talks. I won't get into that today. What I want to emphasize today is the refined mindfulness that the Buddha taught to develop understanding. And he taught mindfulness ultimately in this way. I mentioned the Satipatthana Sutta. That sutta concludes with to be mindful of the Four Noble Truths, and that places a specific application of mindfulness on being mindful of the Eightfold Path. This is a quote where the Buddha teaches Kunda and what mindfulness means. What he said to Kunda that mindfulness means to hold in mind or to recollect and to be mindful of the 7 factors of enlightenment. Again, I won't get into that. And then in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha teaches this to be mindful of the breath in the body. This applies directly to meditation. Be mindful of feelings in the body arising, whether feelings in this reference are any disturbance in the mind, whether it's a physical feeling or a mental emotion. Be mindful of feelings in the body. Be mindful of thinking, being mindful that thoughts are occurring and are determining. If they're unrefined, those thoughts will determine the experience. Be mindful of mind, the point of view of dispassionately observing the breath, the feelings, and the thoughts. This 4th foundation of mindfulness is mindful awareness of the current quality of mind, free of the desire that this quality be any different than what is occurring. I often simplify that by saying simply to be mindful of what's occurring in your mind and be at peace with less than peaceful mind states. And the most direct way to be at peace with less than peaceful mind states is to understand the impermanence of all mind states. And so even if a less than peaceful mind state is occurring, recognize that it's impermanent, recognize that there's nothing personal in that feeling or that mind state, and simply to let it be as it is. And that mind state will often quickly just clear and move on to another quality of mind. The quality of mind is just as impermanent as any other situation that we're involved in. In fact, you really could say that it's the quality of mind that is always changing. Oftentimes our focus is outside of ourselves and affixed on an object or an event, and so the objects or events make it seem like our quality of mind is fixed, when in fact it's always changing. And as we develop the concentration through shamatha vipassana meditation and framed by the Eightfold Path, we recognize and are at peace with an ever-changing quality of mind, meaning that at any moment, the quality of our mind is simply a reference to what's occurring in a dispassionate, impersonal way. In shamatha vipassana meditation, the reason why using shamatha vipassana meditation as the Buddha taught it, as opposed to other methods that seek to develop experience or very specific insight into things, or to be mindful of everything that's occurring, but in a distracted way, meaning a so-called insight meditation does this, to be mindful of everything that comes up and then get into an analytical or holding in mind of everything that's occurring. And that simply creates another distraction. I'm simplifying the insight meditation movement greatly in that there's much more to it than that. But ultimately, the Buddha taught meditation to deepen concentration, not to be distracted by everything that's occurring in meditation. So the initial 4 foundations of mindfulness as taught in the Satipatthana Sutta are first taught as it applies to meditation, to be mindful of the breath in the body, to begin to quiet the mind and bring the mind into what's occurring. Secondly, to be mindful that feelings are arising and to not be distracted by those feelings. Don't analyze it. Don't embrace the feeling. Simply recognize that a feeling is arising. Come back to the sensation of breathing. And that immediately interrupts conditioned thinking and begins to deepen concentration. The third foundation of mindfulness is to be mindful that thoughts are arising, and those thoughts can either be driven by feelings, meaning a reaction to feelings, or the order might be reversed, and it might seem like a thought is driving a feeling. It doesn't really matter. Simply recognize that there's another distraction arising in the mind. Come back to the sensation of breathing. And ultimately, through this process, we'll gain the concentration to make use of the 4th foundation of mindfulness, which means simply be mindful of the present quality of mind. And all of those aspects of mindfulness are dispassionate, refined mindfulness. No matter what's occurring, no matter what the present quality of the mind is, simply recognize it in an impersonal way and remain mindful of what's occurring in our life as life unfolds. And now that the Satipatthana Sutta again gets into other levels and other applications of mindfulness, but always in reference of developing a refined mindfulness of what's occurring now. This is another sutta, the Appamada Sutta, where the Buddha teaches King Pasenadi. I should note that this is a sutta that a very well-known modern Buddhist teacher has changed significantly to say that the Buddha was teaching compassion. And the motivation between changing the focus from mindfulness to compassion is to allow for the underlying bodhisattva movement and to significantly change the direction of the Buddhist teaching. And the abrogation that this modern teacher used is really startling in his using it to directly contradict the Buddhist teachings on mindfulness. And from that platform of ignorance, only further ignorance can follow, and the entire Buddhist teachings really has been changed. The Buddha says, King Pasenadi asked the Buddha, is there one quality that develops understanding of 4 noble truths, both now in this life and for all time? The Buddha responded, there is one quality that develops understanding in this life and for all time, and that quality is mindfulness. And then the Buddha offered this verse: for one who desires long life, great health, nibbana, meaning awakening, the wise praise mindfulness of the Eightfold Path. Notice the Buddha is not saying the wise praise mindfulness of compassion. The Buddha often referred to himself prior to his awakening as an unawakened bodhisattva, and that simply means a human being who has great compassion for other human beings, but is lacking the understanding of the 4 noble truths. And it is from that a position of great compassion, or mindfulness of great compassion, lacking wisdom, that has led to great troubles in the world. And again, I'm not going to make this a talk about misguided altruistic pursuits, but just look around you through history and even in current times. Again, the Buddha referred to himself as an unawakened bodhisattva to point out the dangers of acting in that way. And it's the substitution of the bodhisattva path and the bodhisattva vow for developing the refined mindfulness necessary to hold in mind the Eightfold Path that creates very distracting and misleading modern dharmas. And this was occurring even during the Buddha's time. The Buddha continues in this sutta: when mindful and wise, you develop understanding now and for all time. By breaking through to your own understanding, you are called enlightened. What an important line there. By breaking through to your own understanding, not someone else's understanding, not an understanding that has been adapted and accommodated to fit wrong views, but your own understanding. And again, the Buddha is talking about an understanding that is developed through the framework of the Eightfold Path, not going down a rat hole of wrong views, and simply continuing to develop strategies to ignore ignorance, such as the strategy of changing this simple sutta to mean that the Buddha taught a path of compassion rather than a path of mindfulness. The Buddha used mindfulness repeatedly throughout the 45 years of his teaching career, and always in two very specific applications: the meditation method, shamatha vipassana, and then to be mindful in that developing concentration of the impermanence of all thoughts, events, words, and ideas in a way that refers to anatta, the not self characteristic. So again, gaining an analytical or developing an analytical type of mindfulness, or a fixated type of mindfulness of everything that's occurring, meaning on external objects, which is the great application of mindfulness. Almost in a gleeful way, because it seems like many teachers have taken that one word mindfulness in a misunderstanding, and through misunderstanding and misapplication, then create a doctrine of mindfulness of really just about anything that occurs, or mindfulness of underlying Buddhist concepts such as suffering. And it's often taught to embrace your suffering, or dive deep into suffering. When the Buddha describes the problem of suffering and eye-making, he describes it very simply, that one joins with their suffering. And what could be more misleading than to think that we should put an overemphasis on mindfulness of suffering, rather than simply recognizing the cause of suffering, which is craving and clinging to wrong views. And what could promote that more than a misapplication of mindfulness? There's just one other thing that I wanted to read, if I can find it. So this is from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and these are the last words of the Buddha, and it speaks directly to the type of mindfulness, the refined mindfulness, that the Buddha taught throughout his entire teaching career. Impermanence is relentless, decay inevitable. Work diligently for your own salvation. Mindful you should dwell, clearly comprehending. This I exhort you. So, of course, the Buddha is talking about to be mindful of the framework of the Eightfold Path. That's the only path that he ever taught for his entire teaching career. One of the great benefits of developing the refined mindfulness of the Eightfold Path, rooted in the concentration of the eighth factor of the Eightfold Path, shamatha vipassana meditation, is the freedom of thought that develops, and the freedom of actions. In other words, once we have integrated the Eightfold Path as the way we live our lives, moment by moment, we are assured of living our life in a harmless, compassionate, loving, but most importantly, wise. We are living our life within the wisdom of an awakened human being, and the freedom and power that comes from actually understanding that is, it cannot be described, but it's like the Buddha always said, ehepasiko, come and see for yourself. That's what the Buddha was referring to when he said, break through to your own understanding. The only way that you can know this is to actually develop the Eightfold Path free of the adaptations and accommodations that have been made over the 2,600 years to keep the Buddha's Dhamma pure, simple, and direct. Don't engage with, and certainly don't teach something that others have developed, and many of the modern teachers, modern Buddhist teachers, and this, I'm not talking about a great percentage, but many well-known modern Buddhist teachers have fallen into scandal, and yet there's still great organizations that prop up the teachings of those teachers that have fallen into scandal, and still support teachers, still funnel money into those. I can't think of anything that is more outside of the Buddhist teaching than to continue to prop up and support sexual predators and other people that have lived a life that is completely contradictory to what the Buddha would taught, and to follow their teachings. The sure way of avoiding, in fact, I would say it's the only sure way of avoiding a Dhamma that could lead to that type of thinking and that type of behavior, is to frame it by the Eightfold Path. So that's today's talk on mindfulness. And just to make the point, the Buddha taught mindfulness in a very specific way, and ultimately to be mindful of, to hold in mind the principles of the Eightfold Path, to develop awakening or to develop full human maturity. Those that had listened to me have heard me say very often to be gentle with yourself as you're developing the Dhamma. And the way to do that, the way to be very gentle with ourselves as we're developing a Dhamma, coming up against some of our hard and wrong views, is through the framework of the Eightfold Path, because the framework of the Eightfold Path shows us the impersonal nature of all things, including the impersonal nature of wrong views. And that's a direct, once we recognize that our wrong views are rooted in simple ignorance, a common human problem, then we'll gently let them go and develop a full human awakening. So that's today's talk for today. Thank you for joining me. If you find benefit from this talk, please consider a donation at becoming-buddha.com. Peace.